The crowded bar buzzed with Friday night energy as Marcus Thompson pushed through the throng of people, his mood already sour from a terrible day at work. At 6'2", with broad shoulders and calloused hands from years of construction work, he was used to people moving out of his way. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, his supervisor had embarrassed him in front of the entire crew, questioning his competence on a project he'd been managing for months. Marcus spotted an empty stool at the far end of the bar and made his way toward it, shouldering past conversations and laughter that only irritated him more. As he squeezed between two groups of people, his elbow knocked into someone behind him. He turned to see a woman, probably in her late 20s, with short brown hair and an athletic build. She was wearing jeans and a simple black t-shirt. Nothing fancy, but something about her posture caught his attention for a split second. "Watch it," he muttered, not really looking at her face as he continued toward the bar. The woman, Sarah Mitchell, simply nodded and turned back to her conversation with two other women. She had been enjoying a rare evening out with college friends, something that didn't happen often given her demanding schedule. Sarah had learned long ago to pick her battles, and a rude stranger in a crowded bar wasn't worth her energy. She had dealt with far worse situations than this. Marcus finally reached the bar and ordered a whiskey, downing it quickly before ordering another. The alcohol did little to ease his frustration. Every sip seemed to amplify his anger about the day, about his boss, about feeling like everyone was against him. He had always been quick to anger, a trait that had gotten him into trouble before, but tonight felt different. Tonight the rage seemed to have a life of its own. As the evening wore on, the bar grew more crowded and more chaotic. Marcus had switched to beer but was drinking them faster than he should have. His vision was starting to blur slightly, and his judgment was becoming even more impaired than usual. When last call was announced, he knew he should head home, but the thought of returning to his empty apartment only made him angrier. Sarah and her friends were also preparing to leave. They had spent the evening catching up, sharing stories about their careers and relationships. Sarah had been careful not to reveal too much about her actual job, instead telling people she worked in maritime security. It was technically true, though it barely scratched the surface of what she really did for the Navy. As Sarah made her way toward the exit, she found herself in the same crowded area where she had bumped into the angry man earlier. The bar was emptying out, but people were still packed together near the door, everyone trying to leave at once. She was almost at the exit when she felt someone grab her shoulder roughly. Marcus had seen her again and, in his drunken state, had convinced himself that she had been deliberately trying to get in his way all evening. His anger, which had been simmering all night, suddenly boiled over. Without thinking clearly, he spun her around to face him. "I told you to watch it earlier," he slurred, his breath heavy with alcohol. "You've been bumping into me all night." Sarah looked at him calmly, recognizing the signs of someone who was both drunk and looking for trouble. She had seen this type before, in bars near military bases, men who thought their size and aggression would intimidate anyone they encountered. Her training kicked in immediately, assessing the situation and calculating her options. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said evenly, trying to de-escalate the situation. "I'm just trying to leave." But Marcus was beyond reason. The combination of alcohol, frustration, and wounded pride had created a dangerous cocktail. In his mind, this woman represented everything that had gone wrong in his day, everyone who had ever disrespected him or made him feel small. Before Sarah could react further, before anyone around them could intervene, Marcus drew back his fist and struck her hard across the jaw. The punch landed with a solid thud that echoed even over the bar noise. Several people nearby gasped and turned to stare. Marcus stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, expecting to see the woman crumpled on the floor or crying. Instead, Sarah Mitchell stood exactly where she had been, her hand moving slowly to touch her jaw where his fist had connected. She looked at him with an expression that was completely calm, almost curious, as if she was studying an interesting specimen. There was no fear in her eyes, no tears, no sign of the reaction Marcus had expected. Instead, there was something else entirely, something that made a cold chill run down his spine despite his drunken state. "That was a mistake," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a tone of absolute certainty that cut through the bar noise like a blade. The bar seemed to freeze around them. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as people began to notice the confrontation unfolding near the exit. Marcus blinked hard, trying to focus through the alcohol haze, confused by the woman's reaction. In his experience, when he hit someone, they stayed down. They cried. They ran away. They didn't stand there looking at him like he was some kind of science experiment. Sarah's friends had turned around when they heard the commotion. Jennifer and Lisa, her college roommates, started to rush toward her, but Sarah held up one hand in a subtle gesture that made them stop. They had never seen that particular look on their friend's face before, and something told them to trust her judgment and stay back. "Did you just hit her?" a man standing nearby asked Marcus, his voice rising with disbelief. "Dude, what is wrong with you?" More people were starting to gather, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Some were pulling out their phones, ready to record whatever happened next. Marcus felt the eyes on him, and it only made his anger worse. He had committed to this path now, and his pride wouldn't let him back down, especially not in front of a crowd. "She had it coming," Marcus said loudly, his words slurring together. "Been disrespecting me all night." Sarah continued to study him with that same calm expression. She rolled her jaw slightly, testing the movement. The punch had been solid, thrown with the full weight of a man who clearly knew how to use his fists. Most people would have been on the ground or at least staggered. Instead, Sarah found herself analyzing his technique, noting his stance, cataloging his movements for future reference. "You know," Sarah said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather, "I've been hit by people who actually know how to fight." That was sloppy. Marcus's face reddened with humiliation and rage. The crowd around them was growing larger, and he could hear murmurs of disapproval directed at him. Someone was definitely recording now. His boss would probably see this on social media by Monday morning. The thought made him even angrier. "You want to keep running your mouth?" Marcus stepped closer, looming over Sarah with his height advantage. "I'll shut it for you permanently." What happened next would be talked about in that bar for years to come. As Marcus reached out to grab Sarah's shirt, she moved with a speed and precision that seemed to defy physics. Her hand shot up and caught his wrist, and suddenly Marcus found himself being spun around. Before he could process what was happening, his arm was twisted behind his back and he was being pressed down toward the floor. The movement was so smooth and effortless that most of the crowd didn't even see exactly how it happened. One moment Marcus was standing upright, threatening Sarah, and the next he was face down on the sticky bar floor with his arm twisted at an angle that made several people wince. "Let go of me," Marcus shouted, his voice muffled against the floor. He tried to push himself up with his free hand, but Sarah applied just enough pressure to his trapped arm to make him think twice about struggling. "I don't think you understand the situation you're in," Sarah said, her voice still calm but now carrying an edge that made everyone within earshot pay attention. "You assaulted someone tonight, in front of witnesses, with cameras recording." Marcus tried to twist around to look at her, but the position made it impossible. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the bar on him, could hear the murmurs and comments from the crowd. Someone was definitely calling the police. His night had gone from bad to catastrophic in a matter of seconds. "You some kind of cop?" Marcus grunted, finally starting to understand that he had picked the wrong person to mess with. Sarah almost smiled at that. "If only it were that simple." "Something like that," she replied. The bar manager had pushed through the crowd and was standing nearby, his phone already in his hand. "I've called the police," he announced. "They're on their way." Sarah nodded to him but didn't release her hold on Marcus. She had learned early in her training that controlling a situation meant maintaining control until proper authorities arrived. Letting someone go just because they promised to behave was a luxury she couldn't afford in her line of work, and old habits died hard. "This is ridiculous," Marcus yelled, his face pressed against the floor. "She's the one assaulting me now." Several people in the crowd made sounds of disbelief and disgust. Someone called out, "We all saw you hit her first, buddy." Another voice added, "She's just defending herself." Jennifer and Lisa had finally approached, their faces mixtures of concern and amazement. They had known Sarah was athletic and strong, but they had never seen anything like this. Their quiet friend, who worked in maritime security, had just taken down a man twice her size like it was nothing. "Sarah," Jennifer said quietly, "are you okay?" "I'm fine," Sarah replied, checking her watch. "Police should be here in a few minutes." Marcus was beginning to sober up rapidly. the adrenaline and the uncomfortable position on the floor burning through the alcohol in his system. As his head cleared, he started to realize the magnitude of what he had done. He had attacked a complete stranger in a crowded bar full of witnesses. There would be charges. There would be a court date. His boss would definitely find out about this, but more than that, he was starting to understand that the woman holding him down was not someone ordinary. The way she moved, the way she talked, the complete lack of fear in her voice. This wasn't just someone who had taken a self-defense class. This was someone who knew exactly what she was doing and had probably done it before. The sound of sirens grew louder as 2 police cruisers pulled up outside the bar. Through the windows, red and blue lights painted the walls in alternating colors. The crowd near the door began to disperse slightly, making room for the officers who would soon enter. Marcus felt a knot of dread forming in his stomach as reality continued to set in. Officer David Chen was the first through the door, followed closely by his partner, Officer Maria Santos. Chen was a veteran cop who had seen his share of bar fights, but the scene that greeted him was unusual. Instead of 2 people throwing punches or a crowd holding someone back, he saw a calm woman in jeans and a t-shirt maintaining what appeared to be a professional restraint hold on a much larger man. "Police department," Chen announced, his hand resting casually on his duty belt. "We got a call about an assault." Sarah looked up and nodded respectfully. "Officer, this man struck me unprovoked. I'm holding him until you arrive to prevent him from leaving or causing further harm." Chen approached carefully, noting the precision of Sarah's hold and the complete control she maintained over the situation. In his 15 years on the force, he had seen civilians attempt to restrain suspects before, but this was different. This looked professional. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to release him so we can sort this out properly," Chen said. "Of course," Sarah replied, and smoothly released Marcus's arm while stepping back to give the officers room to work. Marcus immediately tried to scramble to his feet, rubbing his twisted arm and shooting angry glances at Sarah. "That woman attacked me," he declared, pointing at her. "I want her arrested." Officer Santos had been watching the crowd's reaction during this exchange. When Marcus made his accusation, several people immediately began talking at once, all telling the same story. A woman near the back called out, "That's not what happened. He hit her first." "Everyone please calm down," Santos said, raising her voice to address the crowd. "We'll need to speak with witnesses, but let's do this in an orderly fashion." Chen turned to Marcus, noting his disheveled appearance and the smell of alcohol. "Sir, have you been drinking tonight?" "That's not the point," Marcus said, trying to straighten his shirt. "She assaulted me. Look at my arm." "After you struck her," Chen replied, his patience already wearing thin. He had dealt with drunk men who thought they could rewrite history before. "Multiple witnesses have confirmed that you initiated physical contact." The bar manager approached with his hands full of phones. "Officers, at least 6 people got video of what happened. The man definitely hit her first." Sarah remained quiet during these exchanges, simply answering questions when asked directly. She provided her identification when requested, and gave a clear, factual account of what had transpired. Chen noticed that she spoke with a precision and clarity that reminded him of military personnel he had worked with before. "Ma'am, what's your occupation?" Chen asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. "I work for the Navy," Sarah replied simply. Chen nodded, filing that information away. It explained the professional way she had handled the situation. "Any injuries we should know about?" Sarah touched her jaw where Marcus had hit her. There would definitely be a bruise, but nothing serious. "Minor bruising, nothing that requires medical attention." Marcus was becoming increasingly agitated as he watched the situation develop. The witnesses were all backing up Sarah's story. Several people had video evidence, and even the police officers seemed to be treating her with more respect than they were showing him. "This is insane," Marcus protested. "I barely touched her and she nearly broke my arm." Officer Santos had been taking statements from witnesses and approached Chen with her notes. "It's pretty clear-cut," she said quietly. "Multiple witnesses, video evidence, and he still smells like a brewery." Chen nodded and turned back to Marcus. "Sir, you're under arrest for assault. You have the right to remain silent." As Chen began reading Marcus his rights, the reality of the situation finally hit him fully. This wasn't just going to be a fine or a night in jail. There would be court dates, legal fees, possibly jail time. His job was almost certainly in jeopardy, all because he had lost his temper and hit a stranger in a bar. But as he was being handcuffed, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the woman's reaction. The way she had handled him so easily, the complete lack of fear, the professional manner in which she had restrained him. Who was she really? What kind of training did someone need to do what she had done? Sarah watched as Marcus was led toward the exit, flanked by both officers. She felt no satisfaction in seeing him arrested, just a quiet sense that justice was being served. Violence was sometimes necessary in her line of work, but it should never be random or unprovoked like what Marcus had done. Jennifer and Lisa approached her as the crowd began to disperse. "Sarah, that was incredible," Jennifer said, her voice full of amazement. "Where did you learn to do that?" "Just some training I picked up," Sarah replied, still being deliberately vague about her actual job. "Nothing special?" Lisa looked skeptical. "That didn't look like nothing special to me. That looked like something you'd see in an action movie." Sarah smiled but didn't elaborate. Her friends had no idea that she was actually a Navy SEAL, one of the few women to have completed the grueling training program. They thought she worked a desk job in maritime security, filing paperwork and attending meetings. It was easier that way, safer for everyone involved. As they walked toward the exit, Sarah noticed that some people were still staring at her with mixtures of admiration and curiosity. She had tried to handle the situation as quietly as possible, but there was no way to completely avoid attention when something like this happened in a crowded public place. Outside, they could see Marcus being placed in the back of one of the police cruisers. Through the window, he appeared to be talking animatedly, probably still trying to convince the officers that he was somehow the victim in this situation. Marcus spent the night in a holding cell, staring at the concrete walls and trying to process what had happened. The alcohol had worn off completely, leaving him with a pounding headache and a clear memory of his humiliation. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see that woman's calm face as she effortlessly controlled him in front of dozens of people. By morning, his anger had transformed into something else entirely, curiosity mixed with a growing sense of unease. He had been in fights before, had thrown punches at men his own size or larger and usually held his own, but this woman had handled him like he was a child throwing a tantrum. The more he thought about it, the more it bothered him. When his lawyer, a public defender named Frank Morrison, arrived at the jail, Marcus was eager to talk. Morrison was a tired-looking man in his 50s who had seen every type of case the city had to offer. He sat across from Marcus in the small consultation room and opened a file folder. "Assault and battery," Morrison said without preamble. "Multiple witnesses, video evidence, and you were intoxicated. This isn't going to be an easy case to defend." Marcus leaned forward across the small table. "Frank, I need you to find out everything you can about that woman. Something's not right about her." Morrison looked up from his notes. "What do you mean?" "I mean, she took me down like she was trained to do it. Professional training. Military or police or something." Marcus rubbed his shoulder, which was still sore from being twisted. "Normal people don't move like that." "Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that you hit her first," Morrison replied. "Self-defense is legal regardless of how skilled someone is at it." But Marcus couldn't let it go. Over the next several days, as he waited for his court date, he found himself obsessing over the incident. He convinced himself that if he could prove the woman was some kind of trained fighter, it would somehow change the narrative of what had happened. Meanwhile, Sarah had returned to her normal routine. She reported for duty at the naval base, attended briefings, participated in training exercises, and tried to put the bar incident behind her. But word had a way of traveling in military circles, and it wasn't long before her commanding officer, Captain Rebecca Torres, called her into the office. "Mitchell," Torres said as Sarah stood at attention in front of her desk, "I heard you had some excitement this weekend." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, keeping her expression neutral. "A civilian incident that required police intervention." Torres had read the police report and watched the cell phone videos that had been posted online. The footage was grainy and taken from a distance, but it clearly showed Sarah's professional handling of the situation. "The videos are already making rounds on social media. Woman destroys man who hit her is trending." Sarah felt a knot in her stomach. Public attention was the last thing she wanted, especially in her line of work. "I tried to keep it low-key, ma'am." "I know you did. Torres said, leaning back in her chair. But we might have a problem. Someone's been asking questions. She handed Sarah a report that had been forwarded from base security. A private investigator named Tony Russo had been making inquiries about Sarah Mitchell, asking about her background and military service. He was working for Marcus Thompson's defense team. They're fishing, Torres continued, trying to find anything they can use to claim their client was the real victim. Your SEAL status is classified information, but they might piece things together if they keep digging. Sarah read through the report, noting the specific questions that had been asked. What do you recommend, ma'am? For now, we watch and wait. If they get too close to classified information, we'll have to take steps to protect operational security. Torres stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the training facilities. In the meantime, you should know that there's been talk about transferring you to a different assignment. The possibility of transfer hit Sarah harder than Marcus's punch had. She loved her current assignment and the team she worked with. The thought of being moved because of one drunk idiot in a bar was infuriating. Back in the city, Marcus had convinced Frank Morrison to hire Tony Russo despite the additional expense. Russo was a former police detective who specialized in background investigations, and Marcus was paying him with money he couldn't really afford to spend. I've got some interesting information, Russo reported during their meeting at Morrison's office. Sarah Mitchell works at the naval base, but her specific job title is classified. That's unusual for someone who supposedly works in maritime security. Marcus leaned forward eagerly. What does that mean? It means she's either involved in intelligence work or she's military personnel with a specialized role, Russo explained. I tried to get more information through official channels, but I hit a wall of classification protocols. Morrison frowned. Even if she's military, it doesn't change the facts of the case. Maybe not legally, Russo said, but it might change public perception. If we can show that a trained military operative used excessive force against a civilian, it could influence how people view the incident. Marcus felt a surge of vindication. He had been right that something was different about that woman. Can you find out more? I'm working on it, Russo replied. But I have to warn you, if she's involved in classified operations, continuing this investigation could bring unwanted attention from federal authorities. The warning should have made Marcus reconsider, but his obsession with proving he had been wronged was stronger than his common sense. He told Russo to keep digging, not realizing that his investigation was already on the radar of people whose job it was to protect national security. Within the military intelligence community, Sarah's situation was being discussed at levels far above Captain Torres. The combination of viral social media, attention, and a private investigator asking pointed questions about a classified SEAL operator had triggered security protocols. Sarah remained unaware of these higher-level discussions as she went about her duties, but she could sense that something was different. Her teammates were treating her with a mixture of admiration and concern, and she noticed more senior officers observing her training sessions than usual. The incident that had started as a simple bar fight was growing into something much more complex, with implications that none of the original participants had anticipated. Tony Russo had built his reputation on finding information that others couldn't, but the Sarah Mitchell case was proving to be his most challenging assignment yet. Every official inquiry he made hit the same wall of classification protocols, and his unofficial sources in law enforcement were coming up empty. It was as if someone had scrubbed her background clean. What Russo didn't know was that federal agents had already identified his investigation and were quietly monitoring his activities. Agent Lisa Park from Naval Criminal Investigative Service had been assigned to assess the security risk posed by the public attention surrounding Sarah's case. He's persistent, Park reported to her supervisor during their weekly briefing. Russo has contacted 17 different sources trying to get information about Mitchell. He's also hired a cybersecurity specialist to dig into social media and public records. Any breaches so far? Asked Commander James Wright, who oversaw security for special operations personnel. None yet, but he's getting creative. His latest approach involves tracking Mitchell's known associates and trying to piece together her background through their connections. Park pulled up a surveillance photo on her laptop. We intercepted communication showing he plans to approach her college friends for interviews. Commander Wright frowned. That could compromise her cover identity. What's our assessment of Thompson's legal team? The public defender, Morrison, Seems to be going along with his client's obsession reluctantly. He's more focused on plea bargaining than on this investigation, but Thompson himself is driving the whole thing. He's convinced that proving Mitchell is military will somehow vindicate him. Meanwhile, Sarah's friends Jennifer and Lisa had indeed been contacted by someone claiming to be a journalist interested in writing about women's self-defense. Jennifer had hung up immediately, but Lisa had agreed to a brief phone conversation before realizing the caller was fishing for specific information about Sarah. It was weird, Lisa told Jennifer over coffee. He kept asking about Sarah's college years, what kind of activities she was involved in, whether she ever mentioned military interests. When I told him Sarah was just a normal student who studied business, he seemed disappointed. Jennifer stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Do you think we should tell Sarah about this? Probably. It just seems strange that someone would be so interested in her background after that bar thing. Lisa paused. You know, I've been thinking about that night. The way Sarah handled that guy wasn't just lucky or instinctive. That was professional training. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe Sarah hasn't been completely honest with us about what she really does for work. Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah herself, who had arranged to meet them for lunch during her off-duty time. She noticed immediately that both women seemed uncomfortable when she arrived. Everything okay? Sarah asked as she sat down. Jennifer and Lisa exchanged glances before Jennifer spoke up. Sarah, we need to ask you something and we want you to be honest with us. Sarah felt her guard go up instinctively. What kind of question? Someone called Lisa yesterday asking questions about you, Jennifer said. He claimed to be a journalist, but the questions were really specific and kind of invasive. Sarah's expression remained calm, but internally she was calculating the implications. If Marcus's legal team was investigating her background through her friends, the situation was escalating beyond what she had anticipated. What kind of questions? She asked. Lisa leaned forward. Questions about your college activities, your interests, whether you ever talked about military stuff. And Sarah, we've been friends for 8 years. We've never questioned what you told us about your job. But after seeing what happened at the bar, you want to know what I really do for work. Sarah finished. Yes, both women said simultaneously. Sarah looked around the restaurant, noting the exits and checking to see if anyone was paying unusual attention to their conversation. It was a habit that had become second nature, but one that her friends had never noticed before. I work for the Navy, Sarah said carefully. That part is true. But not behind a desk filing paperwork, Jennifer said. It wasn't really a question. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. Her friends deserved some version of the truth, but she also had security clearances and operational considerations to think about. No, not behind a desk, she admitted finally. I'm what you might call a specialist. The training you saw at the bar is part of my job requirements. Lisa's eyes widened. Like special forces? I can't go into specifics, Sarah said. But yes, something like that. The revelation hung in the air between them. Jennifer and Lisa were processing the fact that their quiet, unassuming friend who they thought worked in maritime security was actually some kind of elite military operative. Is that why someone's investigating you? Jennifer asked. Because of what happened with that drunk guy? Probably, Sarah replied. His legal team thinks if they can prove I'm military, it will help his case somehow. Can it hurt you? The investigation, I mean, Lisa asked with concern. Sarah nodded grimly. It could. My work requires a certain level of discretion. Public attention isn't something I can afford. As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Captain Torres. Need to see you immediately. New developments. Sarah read the message and felt her stomach drop. I have to go, she told her friends. And I need you both to promise me something. If anyone else contacts you asking questions about me, don't talk to them. Refer them to the Navy Public Affairs Office. Both women nodded, finally understanding that their friend was involved in something much more serious than they had ever imagined. An hour later, Sarah was sitting in Captain Torres's office, listening to a briefing that confirmed her worst fears. The investigation into her background had attracted federal attention, and there were concerns that Marcus Thompson's obsession with proving her military status could compromise ongoing operations. We have 3 options, Torres explained. We can have you transferred immediately to a non-operational role, We can intervene legally to shut down the investigation, or we can let this play out and see if Thompson's legal team gives up on their own. What do you recommend, ma'am? Torres looked at the file in front of her, which contained reports from Naval Criminal Investigative Service, assessments from base security, and recommendations from higher command. Honestly, Mitchell, I think Thompson has opened a door he can't close. He has no idea what he's stumbled into, and neither does his legal team, but they're about to find out. Marcus Thompson sat in Frank Morrison's office, feeling more confident than he had since the night of his arrest. Tony Russo had just delivered what Marcus considered to be breakthrough information, and he was certain it would change everything about his case. "She's definitely military," Russo announced, spreading several documents across Morrison's desk. "I couldn't get her exact job title, but I found records showing she completed specialized training programs that are only available to elite units." Marcus leaned forward eagerly. "What kind of training?" "Advanced combat techniques, weapons training, survival courses. The kind of stuff they don't teach regular Navy personnel," Russo explained. "And here's the interesting part. There are gaps in her service record that suggest classified assignments." Morrison examined the documents with a growing sense of unease. As a public defender, he had handled cases involving military personnel before, and he knew that digging into classified information could bring serious federal attention. "Tony, how did you get this information?" Morrison asked. "I have sources," Russo replied vaguely. "The important thing is that we can now prove Thompson was assaulted by a trained military operative who used excessive force." What none of them knew was that Agent Lisa Park and her team had been monitoring Russo's investigation every step of the way. The documents he had just presented to Morrison's office contained deliberately placed false information, designed to test how far the private investigator was willing to go in pursuing classified details. "He took the bait," Park reported to Commander Wright during their emergency meeting. "Russo just presented fabricated documents to Thompson's legal team, claiming they prove Mitchell is Special Forces. Documents we provided through a controlled source," Wright confirmed. "And now? Now we spring the trap. Russo has just committed a federal crime by presenting falsified government documents as evidence in a legal proceeding. We have everything we need to shut this down." Back at Morrison's office, the public defender was feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the case. "Marcus, I need to ask you something important. Are you sure you want to pursue this angle? Investigating classified military personnel can have serious consequences." Marcus waved dismissively. "What are they going to do, arrest me for trying to defend myself?" "I have a right to know who attacked me." "You attacked her first," Morrison reminded him. "And if she is Special Forces, it only makes your actions look worse. You assaulted a service member." But Marcus was beyond reason. In his mind, he had been victimized by someone who had used unfair advantages against him. The fact that Sarah might be an elite military operative only reinforced his belief that he was the real victim. "I want you to file a motion demanding full disclosure of her military background," Marcus insisted. "If she's going to hide behind some classified nonsense, then the charges against me should be dropped." Morrison sighed and made notes, knowing that he would have to follow his client's wishes despite his own reservations. He had no way of knowing that filing such a motion would trigger responses from federal agencies that Marcus couldn't even imagine. The next morning, Sarah received an urgent call from Captain Torres. "Mitchell, you need to report to base immediately. We have federal agents here who want to speak with you." When Sarah arrived, she found Agent Park and Commander Wright waiting in Torres's office, along with two other officials she didn't recognize. The atmosphere was serious and formal. "Petty Officer Mitchell," Agent Park began, "we need to brief you on recent developments regarding the investigation into your background." Sarah listened as Park explained how they had been monitoring Tony Russo's activities and had set up a controlled operation to catch him in illegal activity. The private investigator had just committed several federal crimes in his pursuit of classified information. The good news is that we now have grounds to shut down the investigation and prosecute anyone involved in attempting to access classified military records, Park continued. The bad news is that this situation has attracted attention from some very high levels of government. Commander Wright took over the briefing. "Mitchell, your operational status is being reviewed by Joint Chiefs. There's a possibility that your current assignment will be terminated regardless of how we handle the legal situation." Sarah felt her world tilting. Everything she had worked for, all the training and sacrifice that had brought her to this elite position, was in jeopardy because of one drunk man's inability to accept responsibility for his actions. Sir, with respect, I handled the situation by the book. I used minimal force necessary to restrain an attacker and waited for civilian authorities. We know that, Wright replied. Your conduct was exemplary, but operational security requires that SEAL identities remain protected. The level of public attention this case has generated makes that protection difficult to maintain. Agent Park pulled out her phone and showed Sarah several social media posts. The original videos from the bar had spawned dozens of analysis videos, with internet users trying to identify the fighting techniques Sarah had used. Some were getting uncomfortably close to identifying her military training. There's something else, Park added. We intercepted communications showing that Marcus Thompson's legal team is planning to subpoena your military records and demand your appearance at a pre-trial hearing. They want to put you on the stand and question you about your training and background. Sarah understood the implications immediately. A public court appearance would make it impossible to maintain her operational security. Her face would be in court records, news reports, and probably more viral videos. What are my options? She asked. Captain Torres spoke up for the first time since the briefing began. We're working on several approaches. Legal intervention to quash the subpoenas, federal prosecution of the investigation team, and if necessary, witness protection protocols. Witness protection? Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. In extreme cases, we can relocate and reassign personnel whose identities have been compromised, Wright explained. It's not ideal, but it's better than losing an operator to operational exposure. As the meeting continued, Sarah realized that Marcus Thompson's quest for vindication was about to have consequences far beyond anything he could have imagined. His simple assault case was now involving federal agencies, classified operations, and national security protocols. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus was celebrating what he thought was his impending vindication, completely unaware that federal agents were already preparing arrest warrants for his legal team's investigation activities. The federal operation moved with swift precision. At exactly 6 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, Agent Park and her team executed simultaneous raids on Tony Russo's office and Marcus Thompson's apartment. The charges were serious: conspiracy to access classified government information, falsification of federal documents, and attempted espionage. Marcus was still in his bathrobe when federal agents knocked on his door. His confusion quickly turned to panic as he realized the magnitude of what was happening. The simple assault case he thought he could win had somehow escalated into a federal investigation. I don't understand, Marcus kept repeating as agents searched his apartment and confiscated his computer and phone. I was just trying to defend myself in court. Agent Park read him his rights while other agents bagged evidence. Mr. Thompson, you and your associates attempted to access classified military information about a Navy SEAL operator. That's a federal crime regardless of your motivations. The word SEAL hit Marcus like a physical blow. Navy SEAL. He had attacked a Navy SEAL in a bar and then spent weeks trying to expose her identity. The woman who had effortlessly controlled him wasn't just military. She was one of the most elite warriors in the world. Tony Russo was arrested at his office, where agents found files full of fabricated documents, illegal surveillance equipment, and evidence of his attempts to hack into government databases. His law enforcement contacts who had provided information were also being rounded up in coordinated arrests across the city. Frank Morrison, the public defender, was questioned but not arrested. His cooperation with the investigation would depend on his willingness to testify about how Russo had presented the falsified documents and what Marcus had known about the illegal activities. By noon, news of the federal arrests was spreading through legal and law enforcement circles. The story that emerged was both sensational and cautionary. A drunk man's bar fight had led to federal espionage charges when he tried to expose the identity of a Navy SEAL. Sarah learned about the arrests during her afternoon briefing with Captain Torres. Despite the vindication, she felt no satisfaction in seeing Marcus and his associates face federal charges. She had never wanted the situation to escalate to this level. What happens now? Sarah asked. Thompson will likely plead guilty to federal charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, Torres explained. The assault charges against him will proceed separately. but his legal team's illegal investigation has given us significant leverage. And my operational status? Torres smiled for the first time in weeks. Commander Wright received word this morning. Given how you handled the situation and the fact that you never compromised operational security yourself, you're being retained in your current assignment. The federal response has actually reinforced the importance of protecting SEAL identities. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. The nightmare that had started with a drunk man's punch was finally ending without destroying her career. 3 months later, Marcus Thompson stood in federal court facing Judge Patricia Hernandez for sentencing. The assault case had been resolved with a guilty plea, resulting in probation and community service. But the federal charges carried much more serious consequences. Mr. Thompson, Judge Hernandez said, looking down at him from the bench, your actions represent a serious breach of national security. While the court accepts that you may not have fully understood the implications of your investigation, ignorance is not a defense when it comes to protecting classified information. Marcus's new attorney, a criminal defense lawyer his family had mortgaged their house to hire, had negotiated a plea agreement. Marcus would serve 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Tony Russo received a longer sentence for his role in actually falsifying the documents and attempting to hack government systems. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, he finally understood the full scope of his mistake. His moment of drunken violence had not only cost him his job and his reputation, but had also led to federal felony convictions that would follow him for the rest of his life. The story became a cautionary tale that spread through military and law enforcement communities. It was used in training sessions about operational security and in legal seminars about the dangers of investigating classified personnel. Sarah's identity remained protected, known only to those with appropriate clearances. Jennifer and Lisa never learned the full truth about their friend's job, but they understood enough to know that Sarah's work was both important and dangerous. They never asked for details again, content to know that she was serving her country in ways they couldn't fully comprehend. Sarah returned to her normal duties, participating in classified operations around the world. The incident had taught her valuable lessons about maintaining her cover identity and the importance of the security protocols that protected special operations personnel. Occasionally, during quiet moments between missions, she would think about that night in the bar. A drunk man's poor decision had nearly derailed her entire career and had ultimately led to his own destruction. It served as a reminder that violence always had consequences, often far beyond what anyone could anticipate. Marcus Thompson served his full sentence and was released to a world that had moved on without him. He found work in manual labor jobs that didn't require background checks, always carrying the weight of knowing that his life had been destroyed by a single moment of uncontrolled anger. He never learned Sarah's name or saw her again, but he never forgot the lesson she had taught him that night in the bar. Some people were not what they appeared to be, and some mistakes could never be undone. In trying to prove he was the victim, Marcus had only succeeded in proving that actions have consequences, and some consequences last a lifetime. The story of the man who struck a Navy SEAL became legendary in certain circles, a perfect example of how a moment of poor judgment could cascade into federal crimes and life-altering consequences. It stood as a reminder that in a world where heroes walked among us in disguise, it was better to choose kindness over violence, understanding over anger, and humility over pride.